chapter 23, verse 1 to 3 and 8 to 12. Then Jesus said to the crowds and to his disciples, the scribes and Pharisees sit on Moses' seat. Therefore, do whatever they teach you and follow it. But do not do as they do, for they do not practice what they teach. You are not to be called rabbi, for you have one teacher, and you are all students. And call no one your father on earth, for you have one Father, the one in heaven. Nor are you to be called instructor, for you have one instructor, the Messiah. The greatest among you will be your servant. All who exalt themselves will be humbled, and all who humble themselves will be exalted.
Thank you, Tom. The story I shared earlier from the book of Joshua might have sounded kind of familiar to you. This whole image of God holding back the waters while the Israelites cross over across dry ground to a new land. We have heard it before. 40 years before, in fact. The first time this tale was told, Moses was leading the people who had been enslaved by the powerful nation of Egypt into freedom. They crossed the Red Sea in an epic event, escaping from the Pharaoh and his armies to begin their new life as a freed people, a people chosen by God. That event, that 40 years before event, had all the hallmarks of a blockbuster film, complete with the heroic Moses going up against the mighty Pharaoh. It had plagues, it had angels. We got to see Moses sort of standing outlined against the night sky, holding his staff aloft as the waves parted according to the command of God. We saw the slaves, afraid, barefoot, nearly broken, somehow finding the courage within themselves to launch themselves between the towering walls of water. We hear the sounds of pursuit as soldiers and horses and chariots race behind in a frantic chase scene. The suspense at that time was palpable, and the climatic crashing back down of the waves behind the slaves as the last one escaped. Wow. We even had this kind of like running of the credits as the sister of Moses, Miriam, is inspired to capture the whole event in song. Like I said, epic. Now here we are 40 years later. This story from Joshua feels kind of like one of those sad sequels that never quite lives up to the original. Or maybe it seems more like a low-budget remake with B-level actors, you know? So before we had Moses, right? Moses, and he does make a cameo right before this particular scene unfolds, but from there on, it's this new guy, Joshua. Joshua's kind of an unknown. He's out there just trying to make a name for himself. In fact, that's pretty much what God says to him at the very beginning of the story. Today, kid, I'm gonna make you a star, he says. So Joshua has been a humble servant, and now God is going to exalt him, lift him up, so that he can do the work for which he has been called. So basically, we have these two stories of God parting water so that the people can cross over into a new life, a new chapter. And these two stories, they're meant to be kind of like bookends. Something, though, has happened between the two events that stands on its own. So during those 40 years between the Red Sea and the Jordan River, God has worked to turn a group of slaves into a people with an identity, a people with a purpose, a people unified by the knowledge that they were chosen and beloved by this God named Yahweh. 40 years ago, when they crossed the Red Sea, they had been running away from something crossing between the waves. And now they were following the call of their God toward something, toward a promise, toward a vision. 40 years ago, it was the staff of this one man, Moses, that with the Spirit of God parted the waters before them. Now, 40 years later, it was the feet of the people themselves with the Spirit of God that allowed that path to appear as the waters parted. So let's just take a look at this crew, this group of people that left Egypt and were now standing on the banks of the Jordan. It's important to know that they were barely formed as a people of God. When they left Egypt, the only thing they actually had in common with each other was the experience of being slaves in a foreign land. They were a disparate group of people. They had various ethnic backgrounds, different histories, possibly even different languages. The word Hebrew, which we kind of conceive now as a very identifiable group of people, but the word Hebrew was really just what the Egyptians called them. It was kind of actually a non-identity. Hebrew for the Egyptians just meant anybody who was not Egyptian. So they were just Hebrews. In many ways, these Hebrews who followed Moses were just kind of thrown together to work things out over the course of their journey through the wilderness. The book of Exodus makes clear that that journey was far from a smooth process, and in fact, it was pretty darn messy. Still, after 40 years of wandering, they had managed to get themselves to the Jordan River, which was another point of decision along the way. So I've been thinking a lot about this mass of people, this mishmash of folks called the Hebrews, stumbling their way through the journey to get to this point. I imagine there were little kids ramming around getting in people's way. I imagine there were teenagers daring each other to teenage acts of stupidity. There were probably old people whose feet just ached and they were like, yeah, do we really feel like getting in wet in this water? There were people who probably kind of lived and breathed compassion. They wore their hearts on their sleeves. And then there were others probably trying to figure out how to unseat Joshua and take command. None of them, not a single one of them, asked to be born at this particular time. Nor had they asked to be moving through life with this particular group of people facing these specific challenges. They hadn't asked, they were just there. It was their chapter to write alongside of this particular group of characters and this set of plot points. Like us, some of them might have wished that they lived in less interesting times. But here they were. We are all on that same journey. We are surrounded by a mishmash of people. And I just learned this morning that mishmash is the same in Italian. Mishmash. We're surrounded by this mishmash of people who happen to be passing through this space and time at the same time as us. Some of these fellow travelers make sense to us. Some of them just don't. There are people sharing this lifetime with us whose vision and voice inspires us, and some whose words and actions scare us. There are those characters that kind of loom large on the horizon, and others who fill our pages and shape our story without our ever even noticing them. But they're there. And so we too wander through the wilderness of existence, trying to connect dots, trying to find meaning, choose purpose, trying to set our course accordingly. So, as you know, I recently met with a group of adults from Italy who are deepening their English skills, which, by the way, are fantastic. But they're using the creative writing process to work on their language. These are people who are also part of this timeline's crowd. But their names and faces have only recently become known to me. They've always been there, I just didn't know them before. The class had invited me to speak to them via Zoom about my process in writing sermons. One of those students actually nailed my process when he quoted some other author who said, "Writing is 95% walking and 5% sitting." That is completely true of me. I take many walks, and the closer I am to deadline, the longer those walks become. Anyway, I had shared with that class my growing affection for that biblical stock character known simply as the crowd. Anybody who's spending any time with the Bible just sees the crowd showing up over and over and over again. Like it or not, we are all part of the crowd. And here in America, as we get closer to the election, that crowd is getting more and more uptight, upset, and unsettled. Surprisingly, as this happens, I have begun feeling a growing sense of kinship with people from all perspectives, those that sit comfortably with me and those that do not. Like the Hebrews, the mishmash of people standing on the edge of the River Jordan, like them, we are, all of us, just kind of randomly thrown together in this timeline, and we are dealing with a storyline that is, I think the best word might be fraught. Fraught. So after spending most of my life trying hard not to be part of the crowd, I'm finding kind of a sudden and odd affection for this particular crowd right now, and a desire to make sure that we all make it through this passage and into the next chapter together. None of us asked to be here, and yet here we all are. There is a way forward, and as children of God, it is our calling to be sure as many of us as possible find our way through this passage and time and make it to the other side. I have been so fortunate to meet some of the folks who have been in this crowd of fellow travelers all along, but whose names and faces I've only recently gotten to know. So this writing group in Italy took a courageous step. They decided to try their own hands at writing a sermon. Keep in mind that this small group encompasses Catholics, someone who I suspect has Buddhist leanings, an atheist, those whose faith histories are just unknown to me. So this past week, they shared those sermons, and through their words, my own way forward became more clear. I felt a strengthening of my resolve, like those early Hebrew priests, to just step out into the waters, trust that God is going to clear a way for us all to pass. So with their permission, I'm sharing a few thoughts from the crowd across the ocean who spent time with this story of Joshua as well as the words of Jesus when Jesus said, "All who exalt themselves will be humbled, and all who humble themselves will be exalted." And to any of those students listening in, here's a truth about sermons that I failed to mention. What you wrote and what I heard, those may be two very different things. Happens all the time when I'm preaching. All of these are also, there'll be some quotes, but a lot of it's paraphrased, so I hope I've done justice to your thoughts. Suzanne spoke to this message from Jesus about becoming humble, reminding me not to look to others for approval or gratitude, but to understand that our deepest satisfaction in life comes from living out of our own highest self, the self that has chosen a set of principles, of holy values, and walks that self forward into the waters. Chiara made the observation that humbling ourselves does not mean necessarily wallowing around in misery. As she wrote, and I am quoting, "A little satisfaction also makes for better humor and gives new energies to continue." So she reminded me that humility means paying attention to those around me, listening, learning, and serving when the opportunity arises. This way, the crowd is transformed into unique individual children of God. I had mentioned that the Protestant preacher is often said to speak with the Bible in one hand and the newspaper in the other. Domenico took this to heart and shared a current news piece describing a debate between the two women who are vying for the title of Prime Minister in New Zealand. Of course, as Americans, we don't pay attention to this stuff, but I urge you, keep track of what's going on around the world. At the end of their time, in their debate, the women were asked what one thing they would want to say to the other. And unlike in our own debates, rather than take their precious last moments to tear each other down, these women both used that time to thank the other for their leadership and their compassion. They spoke with a shared empathy and understanding that they were both just doing their best to serve out their callings. The student spoke to the need to trust more women with power and leadership. And here I'm quoting him, "In this way, we will build the well-managed household we deserve for ourselves, and we will be co-workers in the name of what is right and good." Marino, likewise, shared a story of a woman whose quiet willingness to speak up had been a gift to so many. He preached about the life of Liliana Segre, a Holocaust survivor, a woman who had kept silent about her experiences throughout her life, not wanting to be a burden to anyone, but finally came to a place where she felt the need to share her story. Her courage and her life history spoke out from the crowd, reminding them, as Marino said, that beyond and behind every person, there are an unknown past and an unpredictable future. Marino, who I believe is with us today, speaks with the heart of a poet. And he wrote that Liliana Segre offered a glimpse of the blurry path forward, his words. And these were my favorite. Her story signed his soul. I have spent a lot of time thinking about the signatures that have been left on my soul as I face the blurry path ahead. That great cloud of witnesses. I'm grateful that all of these students, along with their wise, warm, and wonderful teacher, Caroline, are part of my crowd during this lifetime, and they are a part of yours as well. I'm grateful for each one of you here that our particular storylines have crossed, so that as we face the rivers of the River Jordan, this unnerving crossing into an unknown and blurry future, it's good to have some familiar faces and voices around me. And my heart reaches out to the rest of the mishmash of people, all of us, just trying to find our way forward during the same passageway through time. And really here at this juncture, just committing myself to doing my best to getting as many of us across as possible. So I'd like to end with this hopeful quote from Domenico, who shared this at the end of our kind of conversational time together. And this just cracked me up, and I loved it and find truth in it. He said, "When you see an atheist writing a sermon and reading it aloud to a reverend, you can really think that the world is coming together in the best possible way. So keep going." Crowd of my heart, we have made it this far. In the name of God, keep going. Amen.
Smile though your heart is aching. Smile even though it's breaking. When there are clouds in the sky, you'll get by. If you smile through your fear and sorrow, smile and maybe tomorrow you'll see the sun come shining through for you. Light up your face with gladness, hide every trace of sadness. Although a tear may ever be near, it's the time you must keep on trying. Smile, what's the use in crying? You'll find that life is still worthwhile if you just